Greetings to everyone, friends. Roman Pohorili is here from the Deep State team. And today, as usual, we'll talk about the situation on the front. But before we begin, I once again urge you to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, be sure to leave your comments, and also share this video. Let's get started. Friends, in the last video, we discussed the assault actions in the Dobropillia sector, specifically targeting the settlements of Volodymyrivka, as well as the area under responsibility of the 93rd Brigade. And strangely enough, right after the video came out, the enemy repeated their attempts at assault, using a rather large amount of equipment. That included heavy vehicles like tanks, APCs, IFVs, and also lighter ones like cars, motorcycles, and so on. A huge number of infantry was involved, who, after taking losses, unfortunately scattered, regrouped, and dug in inside houses, ruins, basements. Speaking of repelling the attack, it wasn't that difficult to target the vehicles themselves, which came under fire from all sides, just like last time. The real challenge was working against the infantry, finding them, eliminating them, clearing them out. And this, in fact, is still ongoing, because the enemy managed to bring in about 50 or more infantry units who spread out through the settlement. The objective of this attack, of this assault, was to break through deeper into the territory. Because the enemy understood the weather was bad and used that to their advantage, hoping that FPV drones wouldn't fly, that artillery wouldn't operate effectively. But despite the poor weather conditions, the defense forces still managed to repel the assault and stop the enemy, who once again failed to achieve any meaningful success. At the same time, speaking of the 93rd Brigade's area of responsibility, there was an attempted advance in the area near Novolenivka. And it was near this settlement, which we've mentioned before, that the defense forces used FPV drones to hit the enemy equipment. As for how it ended, out of 8 vehicles, 3 were hit. 1 was destroyed, 2 were damaged, and the rest turned around and started fleeing without making another attempt. So this was a successful repelling of the attack even before they reached the line of contact. What does this show? The enemy has built up quite a lot of equipment in this area. They already had some, but additional reinforcements arrived in the form of naval infantry, which gave them more resources to work with. Now, taking advantage of the weather conditions, and this is precisely what's prompting them to launch these assaults, they are using this opportunity to try and break through, aiming to drive deep into the territory, establish positions, leave infantry there, and let them carry on with further objectives. This makes the job much more difficult, but we can see that Ukrainian troops are managing to stop all of it. So we'll continue monitoring the situation and respond accordingly to any changes on the map. And now, friends, let's talk about the city of Pokrovsk, because the situation there is also becoming more difficult. The enemy continues to apply pressure and unfortunately has had some success advancing into the city, infiltrating more deeply. Their endless stream of infantry keeps trying to sneak in somewhere, to flank positions and dig in, hide in the city, and this effort doesn't stop. Looking at the map now, we can primarily see this around the areas of Pershetravnya and Troyanda, and in general on the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. That's currently marked as a gray zone. Why is it considered a gray zone today? Because even when we speak directly with the soldiers holding these positions, and the drone pilots operating in this area, in this gray zone, they report that the enemy, for the most part, fails to establish a foothold, and isn't even really trying. We'll actually return to this point later, but in another sector. Those who read our Telegram channel have already seen mentions of enemy entrenchment. But staying within the context of Pokrovsk, today we're seeing a situation where the enemy doesn't even try to stay for long in this gray zone, or even on the very southern edges of the city itself. Instead, they're trying to break into the city proper, to infiltrate it, hide inside, regroup, and destabilize the situation from within. It wouldn't be accurate to call these sabotage recon groups, because their tasks and roles are quite different from the assault groups currently operating in this sector. And how do they operate? They simply crawl in, they push through, and storm their way into the city. These are standard assault operations, continuous attacks on the city by the enemy, because as I already mentioned at the beginning, they have an endless supply of infantry. But there are other troubling signs, indications that the enemy has managed to push deeper into the city. Their presence is being recorded in certain areas, and the number of such sightings keeps increasing. However, as of today, we don't have full confirmation of this information. Of course, we're working on verifying it, especially since we continue to record enemy losses. And so far, those are indeed concentrated directly on the outskirts, where our map reflects those marks. For now, we're not planning to recolor that area into the red zone, since there are no established enemy positions or areas under their control where they could amass forces. Our drone pilots are actively working in that area. And once again, it's worth giving them credit. They're doing their job brilliantly. Though there are also unpleasant moments when the enemy suddenly appears right near the drone operators' positions, near where the drones are being launched, and they have to engage in close small arms firefights. We'll keep watching the situation closely, since the enemy does have the potential to advance there. And now, friends, let's talk about Serebrianka and the huge gray zone that formed there after the recent map update. There's been a flood of questions, comments, and discussions. Some people come and claim that there's already a large red zone there. That supposedly, the enemy has entrenched themselves right inside the settlement of Serebrianka, taken control of it, and continues launching assaults from there. We've written extensively about this area before, explaining and justifying why it remains a gray zone. Of course, every stretch of the front line is different, each with its own distinct nature and character of combat. But if we talk specifically about this sector, Serebrianka, Dronivka, and let's include Seversk as well, since fighting takes place nearby, and also the Serebrianska Forestry, then we're dealing with a very specific and unique situation. Let's go over it together now. Those who follow our Telegram channel may have already read about this, but today we'll talk about it here on our YouTube channel. So, let's talk about the gray zone. First of all, it's important to note that this is one of the largest gray zones along the entire front line. An area marked by constant enemy sightings, continuous strikes against them, but without any clear control or established frontline positions. The enemy is constantly being detected in nearly every patch of this area. If you look at the recorded strikes or drone footage, you can already spot them in Dronivka, directly in Serebrianka, to the south of Serebrianka, everywhere. And yes, that might lead some to assume and insist that they're always there, that they're holding it, that we should mark it as a red zone. But no, that's not the case. Specifically, the Russians continue advancing from the direction of Hrihorivka, moving along the Siversky Donets River through Serebrianka, and trying to push deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. At the same time, they're also attempting to move south of Serebrianka. And according to soldiers, especially drone pilots working in that area and conducting reconnaissance, the enemy has been using motorcycles as well, trying to speed through, break deeper inside, dig in somewhere, find cover, and build up forces for further advancement. However, according to observations, not only ours, but also based on the feedback from soldiers fighting there and analyzing the situation, the enemy doesn't seem to have any specific objective to hold ground anywhere, even in the Serebrianka area. For some reason, their main goal appears to be simply to push forward as far as possible, without establishing any fixed strongpoints. The only kind of fixed position they have is a temporary gathering spot, where they regroup and continue moving onward. Ukrainian soldiers have to constantly monitor all of this and respond with strikes whenever possible. At the same time, there's a very serious issue. There's a shortage of manpower, a shortage of defensive positions. It's impossible to build a dense, continuous defensive line, positions tight enough to fully control enemy movement, block them, and engage them the moment they emerge. Unfortunately, that's the reality. The enemy knows this and is exploiting it, launching these kinds of small group assault operations. Over the past few days, and particularly in recent updates, enemy activity has already been recorded directly in Dronivka, And even in the latest update, you could see that the gray zone there has expanded. Why don't we mark it as red? Because there are no fixed positions, no permanent control. And even in Serebrianka, where some commenters noted that the enemy has already entered and therefore must control that area, that's not true. They don't control it because they don't stay there for long. They don't build posts there, they don't set up positions or leave their drone operators behind. And at the same time, we need to thank the Ukrainian Defense Forces who make sure the enemy can't linger, including in this very settlement, because constant fire is raining down on them there. The area is under intense fire control, which is exactly why there are no entrenched positions. The enemy keeps moving past Serebrianka or further south toward Dronivka, where they also try to hide. We've even published footage showing how they enter a house, and seconds later it gets hit. Judging by the reports and strike confirmations, 200, 200, 200, meaning dead, dead, dead. They don't live long there. So we mark this area on the map according to reality. We've said many times that the line of contact changes, and the character of combat changes as well. It's worth noting that recently, even in this gray zone, there haven't been any flag planting stunts like those you might see in the Dobropillia region. They just move aimlessly. What their tactic or objective is, no one knows. But on the other hand, this actually benefits the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Benefits all of us, because the enemy is dying pointlessly, accomplishing absolutely nothing. Hopefully that continues. They'll eventually exhaust their resources, their manpower, forcing them to regroup or stop. But unfortunately, for now, there's still a lot of infantry, and there's nothing to do but keep destroying them. At the same time, the loss of the Serebrianka forestry area has had a negative effect. From the woods there, especially near Serebrianka, the enemy tries to cross the river, gather forces, and then push further in, particularly toward Dronivka. And right now on your screen, you can see similar attempts to cross, where the enemy tried to swim across the Zerebets River. You can see that miserable little boat with a few infantrymen. They didn't live long. They tried to move in the direction of Yampil, among the groups that are still attempting to infiltrate the village even now. But spoiler, they didn't make it. They never got there. So similar attempts, like the ones you can see in this footage, are happening all along this entire sector, near Serebrianka, the Serebrianka forestry, and Yampil. Unfortunately, these attempts don't stop, but the Ukrainian Defense Forces keep working, and working again. And finally, let's talk about the settlements of Mirny, Perabudova, and Komar. On the map, you've long seen a gray zone in this area, forming a kind of bottleneck, an encirclement risk for the Defense Forces positions, especially around the settlement of Komar, which was the last point of this gray patch on the map. Many other analysts, commentators, and people following the war had already marked this sector of the front as occupied. Supposedly under full enemy control. Unfortunately, Ukrainian defense positions had remained inside that bottleneck for a long time. We knew about it, and we tried to figure out why they were staying there so long, what the purpose of those positions was, and what could be done so that the troops wouldn't have to stay there indefinitely. But the fact remains, all that time they tried to hold their ground, and in some ways, they managed to do it quite effectively, for quite a while. But if we look at the current picture, we can now see confirmed positions showing the enemy's presence. It's also important to note that the enemy has shifted its focus, redirecting attention to other parts of the front. Because of that, they weren't pressing very hard here. They were only occasionally active, carrying out minor assaults, which allowed Ukrainian troops to keep holding out. But over time, even that kind of holding became senseless. When the enemy has already moved deep into the rear, when they've infiltrated positions further than the Ukrainian ones near Komar, yet there was still no command to retreat. This, in part, was due to the actions of the current corps commander, who still holds his position today. Even when reports came in describing how dire the situation was, the troops in the Komar area were still ordered to hold the line. Eventually, it reached the point where the enemy simply obliterated the positions that were impossible to defend. The soldiers were wounded, and after multiple desperate attempts to hold on, they had to fight their way out on their own, because staying there any longer was simply impossible. And here's the question. What was the point of holding that position? What was the point of keeping people there? Soldiers who could have been more useful and alive on other fronts, instead of forcing them to stay until the situation became hopeless. And in the end, those positions were still abandoned. The enemy captured them anyway, and there could have been even heavier losses, irreversible ones. Because soldiers' lives are the most valuable thing. So this serves as an example that open source intelligence, which simply records video or photo evidence from a distance, can be misleading. As I mentioned earlier, most people considered this territory occupied. But by maintaining direct communication with the soldiers on the ground, we knew and understood that our troops were still holding positions there. To some extent, operational security measures were respected to protect those soldiers. And once it became possible to safely mark it on the map, we updated it, showing the current reality of what's happening in that area today. Friends, thank you for watching this video, and thank you for your time. As always, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, be sure to leave your comments, and share it, so that more people can learn about what's really happening on the front. Thank you, and see you next time.
Дякую і до нових зустрічей.